today, back for the second part, Charles Sina from Think ITSM is joining us with his second part of a special two-part webcast series, Building a Customer Satisfaction Survey that Drives Service Improvement. Charles will be discussing how organizations can now implement these systems, execute surveys, and measure results. Charles has been working with organizations for over 16 years in the IT service management industry, helping to address efficiencies and improve customer support by deploying new service management tools. He is the co-founder and president of Think ITSM, and whose focus is to ensure they continue to provide the best measurement experience for IT service desks around the world. He's an industry thought leader, excellent presenter, and a regular TRRACC contributor, and we're very, very thrilled to have him back. So I'll now turn the session over for week number 2 to Charles. Charles.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. Thanks for participating in this presentation. If you came to the last week's session, then an extra special thank you for coming back and seeing part 2. Just to recap some of the objectives that we have for the series of these presentations, it was really about providing a simplified surveying methodology specifically designed for IT and service desk, or what I would call the IT support chain, so sort of every piece of IT that's involved in support. We're going to look at what some organizations have been doing today, and I've got some examples today specifically of organizations who have taken customer satisfaction to the next level and have made it part of a continual service improvement program that actually is designed to improve performance. And we're going to provide everyone with an opportunity to sort of move through the survey creation process. We're going to look at a completed survey that's fully designed, and we're going to talk about some of the things that we did to establish it, so you can go ahead and start building out your own one. In terms of the outline today, we're going to do a quick recap of where we were last week, and then we're going to focus on a couple of different areas, predominantly reviewing of completed customer satisfaction survey. Last time we kind of talked about some of the difficulties in creating a customer satisfaction metric or measure. We're going to actually look at a completed survey today. We're going to analyze that. And then we're going to look at how we can take that data that we're collecting and incorporate it into a service improvement program or a continual service improvement program. So, without any further ado, let's get going. From a recap perspective, the things that we talked about last week were about implementing customer satisfaction measurement around a methodology. And the point here is really that we see organizations, do a survey, but really the customer satisfaction measure is more than just sending out a survey. It's really designing a measurement program that allows you to change the questions over a period of time. It allows you to measure your improvement or non-improvement over a period of time, and it provides with an actionable list of things that you can do to actually help you improve performance around your satisfaction survey. We talked a little bit about asking questions that are relevant to your goals. In that particular area is that if you want to benchmark yourself against other organizations, you're probably going to ask different types of questions than if you're going to try and improve performance. Personally, I think that there's so many variables in terms of how one organization conducts IT support versus another organization conducts IT support. You want to ask yourself, what's the value of us benchmarking ourselves to other organizations as opposed to using yourselves as a benchmark or a baseline and look at how you can improve upon your own performance. We talked about using multiple data gathering techniques, so results aren't artificially inflated. I think there was an anecdote that I wanted to share with you last week that I actually didn't get around to because we had an awful lot of content to cover, but it was really an interaction that I had recently with my cell phone provider. I recently acquired a new smartphone, and I called up the technical support center when I had a particular issue, and they resolved my issue. First call resolution right off the bat. It was great. I was very satisfied, and they actually sent me a survey, and I dutifully completed it and gave them great results. I think it was about 2 weeks later that I actually had a reoccurrence of the issue on my smartphone. So I called up the support. Once again, they were able to resolve the issue at first call resolution. They sent me a survey to follow up, and it was really interesting when I looked at the wording of this particular survey. It was really asking me to measure my satisfaction for this particular transaction, And the transaction, actually, I was quite happy about. And so, again, they actually got a pretty good review. And, this happened sort of a couple more times. There were a number of other issues that sort of, came up, and I think I logged 3 additional incidents. Each time it was resolved, quite satisfactorily, first call resolution each time. However, when I look at my overall experience, it didn't really reflect in those individual surveys that I actually completed. And so I know a lot of organizations who send out transactional surveys to their end users or their customers, and they're asking about a particular, experience. And sometimes when you do that, you might get overinflated results because you did provide a great individual experience, but the overall experience, the end-to-end service delivery experience, potentially isn't that great. And so what I'd like to see from my cell phone provider is for them to send me out another survey that talks about my overall experience with using this particular smartphone. And they might well identify other types of improvements that might come from that. So it's important that you might not just choose or rely on one particular survey gathering technique, otherwise you might get artificially inflated results. We suggest using customer satisfaction as part of a CSI program, and today, or really the purpose of today, was to talk about how we can take those survey results and really drive improvement through some type of CSI program and how that could work. We're going to spend time focusing, we suggest that you spend time not only focusing on how you're going to send out a survey and design a survey, which is where I see a lot of organizations spend an awful lot of time. We really want to spend some time on action and what we're going to do with the data once we've collected it. And again, we're going to actually look at that in more detail today. And finally, we talked about not being afraid to communicate results back to stakeholders. A lot of organizations complain that they don't get very high response rates from surveys. And some of the things that we find is that when you communicate your when you communicate your results back to your end users, we actually find that response rates incrementally increase over time, dependent on the amount of communication that goes back based on the results based on the sharing of the results of the survey. So before we sort of drill down into our survey itself and just explore what it looks like, I just want to spend a little bit more time on these survey dimensions. We kind of introduced the concept of survey dimensions to you last time, but we didn't really go through them in any amount of detail. The whole purpose of dimensions is that I want to be able to change my questions over a period of time. If I change my questions over a period of time, how do I maintain meaningful analysis from one data period to the next data period? For example, if I asked, how satisfied you were with me answering the telephone, with the speed of me answering the telephone, in Q1, and then, Q2, I changed my question to how satisfied were you with the length of the call queue, for example. How do I make the change of question 1 to change of question 2 relevant? And we find that the best way of doing that is to include survey dimensions. And a survey dimension is just a simple way to group the types of questions that you're asking in a logical category. So timeliness questions, sit under the timeliness dimension, reliability questions, etc. And so what we're going to do is just look at each of these dimensions and look at the types of questions that you might ask under each one. So the timeliness dimension is really, measuring whether the interactions occur at the right time from the customer's perspective. And we normally ask questions around the timely delivery of service or the wait time for a particular type of action. So anything relating to time normally sits under this particular dimension. And the second track or dimension was reliability. This is really about measuring, are we delivering what we said we were going to deliver? Did we do it consistently? Did we do it correctly? So providing the needed service, are we providing what was promised? Did we adhere to any particular policy or standards? There might be questions regarding error rates and also consistency about the experience that they might experience within IT. The next dimension that we use is responsiveness. This is really reacting to our customers' needs. We're talking about whether our design of service is being delivered effectively. We are reacting to concerns of our customers, and these are the kinds of questions where we're measuring how helpful, considerate, understanding, knowledgeable our support agents or the escalation groups within our IT support chain might be when dealing with a particular issue or service request. We have the accessibility dimension. This is providing interactions regarding simplicity and openness. You know, how easy is it to access our service desk? Do we have the right hours of operation in place? Do we provide our customers with lots of choice? Do they have to go through the telephone, or do they have, you know, a kiosk or a self-service portal or Twitter or chat or whatever it happens to be? And also, how intelligent are we? You know, do we seem to know all about our customer, what their job is, what they need to do to be successful in that job? So these are the types of questions that you might design around accessibility. Then you have the communications dimension. The communications dimension is really talking about whether we're providing some type of actionable voice to the customer. Do they feel that they're kept informed during the support cycle? So we talk about things like providing regular updates of information, that we speak in clear, understandable language, and so they don't have to keep saying, sorry, what did you say, or pardon me. We're not using jargon that, you know, goes above or below people's heads that we're talking to, and that we're providing consistent information on an ongoing basis. Then there's the dimension cost and value. Often cost and value isn't added for most IT support surveys because the people that you might be surveying might not be paying for the service. However, if in any way the people that you are surveying are paying for the service, you might want to ask them about whether the cost of using that service is not only transparent, but is it reasonable? Are they getting value for that service? And can they sort of understand what the relationship is between the service that's being provided and the costs that are being incurred? Cost and value becomes much more important when you're doing sort of executive surveys to senior management. Now, going back to the last presentation, there was the question actually that was asked, you know, do you need, or can you change these dimensions? And you know, my suggestion was, you know, you might want to keep dimensions sort of fairly standard and then make changes to your questions over a period of time. And if you're doing a transactional end-user survey, it doesn't necessarily make sense to include all of these dimensions, because you might have a couple of questions for each dimension, and before you know it, you've got this survey that's incredibly long, and nobody's going to fill it out. And so what a lot of organizations do is they might just pick one dimension, and they might measure that one dimension for a period of time, or they might just choose a couple of dimensions. And then over time, you can sort of start building a picture about areas of improvement based on the dimensions that you're seeing. So when we get into the point where we're going to actually design the question, I kind of showed this slide last time, but we're going to go to the next step and actually look at it in more detail. For service improvement programs, you know, we recommend that there are two dimensions that you measure. Number one, you're going to ask people how satisfied they are, okay? And this is very typical. You know, when you get a survey, people are, you know, are asked, you know, to rate their level of satisfaction. In this particular case, we use a 5-point scale. You know, there's some debate in the industry about whether you might want to use a 4-point scale. The reason for that, particular debate is that you want to force people to sort of describe whether they have a positive or a negative experience. So if they chose a 3, it's leaning towards a positive experience. If they choose a 2, it's leaning towards a negative experience. Some people say that if you go with 5, it basically, you know, gives people an out to, you know, particularly choose a 3. Personally, I actually like the 5 because in some cases people actually don't have a negative or a positive feeling about the service, and you know, they're basically saying that, yeah, I really don't have any strong feelings, you know, plus or minus. And so we want to provide them with that type of option as well. When we're choosing satisfaction type questions, the way we phrase the question is also important. We're talking about rating the something of the something. So we're trying to be able to ask one question, and we're trying to garner 2 different types of responses. How satisfied are you? And also, how important is this to you? And the reason that we ask about importance is that we're trying to implement a service improvement program, and we don't have unlimited dollars, and we don't have unlimited resources, and we want to focus on the things that make the most sense from the client's perspective. And so from that perspective, we ask about importance because we want to really know what we need to be fixing in our environment, and we really want to focus on getting actionable information. So if we look at a full completed survey, let's explore that. So this is a survey that actually one of our clients is actually running right now. It's a transactional survey, and by transactional survey, this survey gets sent out every time an incident gets closed. And in this particular case, the organization has the same incident survey that goes out whether it was resolved at first point of contact or whether it was escalated. I normally prefer having two different types of surveys, one that goes out when a ticket is resolved at first point of contact, and one that's a separate set of questions that go out if the ticket has been escalated. But for this particular organization's system, they don't have an accurate way of measuring whether calls are actually resolved at customer first contact, and so that's why you have a specific survey that goes out. So we talked about these important and satisfaction questions, but we like to kick off the survey by just by just getting the customer to answer a couple of very important items, because we want to confirm that overall we're delivering the level of service that we thought we were delivering. There might be some, problems, that we're going to, resolve in terms of timeliness and some of the other things in the background. But ultimately, we want to know whether this problem or question was actually resolved. And, we should hopefully hear, get a very high percentage of definitely yes. If we're closing tickets, we want to make sure that the client, agrees with us that yes, we're definitely resolving these issues. The second thing that we ask is just an overall observation about how satisfied they were with the overall technical support that they received. These two measures, basically, I look for them to sort of correlate with the next questions that are being asked, and I'll sort of show you those in one moment. So once those two questions have been asked, the next questions, there's basically 5 more questions that we're asking them. We say, how promptly did IT respond to your inquiry? And then here you see the satisfaction and the importance rating, and they're going to rate either from low to high, and in some cases they might not know, and they might not understand, and so we basically have a don't know option here because each of these questions are compulsory. The ability of IT to be able to respond to your request with minimum handoffs. The reason that we ask this question for this particular customer is that one of the biggest challenges that they have is increasing the rates that the help desk can actually resolve issues at customer first contact. And so we wanted to understand, the impact of that low number on customer satisfaction, and so that's why that question was in there. The professionalism of IT support who you initially contacted about the issue. So in this particular organization, because they weren't able to track whether the issue was first call resolution, this question is really asked about the professionalism of the person on the service desk. And then the next question, rate how knowledgeable and informative the IT support person was who resolved the issue. This typically is going to be a person either on the service desk or a person who's escalated. One of the things what we do is we attach the incident to the survey, and so if we do get negative responses, the organization can go back and actually do a decomposition within their service management application and understand exactly what happened because the incident is there, and they obviously also know who the customer is who's reporting this. Support personnel knew where I worked, the technology I had, and other relevant background information. This particular survey was actually designed for a hospital. And the reason that this question was asked was that in focus group meetings, physicians complained that the people in IT had no idea how the physicians did their job or what technology they needed to do their job. And this was really identified as a big area of improvement. So we started asking this question to get a baseline value, and then as we rolled out improvements to actually make sure that we understood who the physician was, what their role was within the organization, what technology they had access to, the type of applications they used, the type of security that they needed, and we kind of built that in to the ITSM tool, we were able to track improvements to this over periods of time, and it became sort of part of the good news story that we're talking about when we're building a service improvement plan. Now for this,
Charles, sorry, Charles. There's a couple of questions here. If it's a good point to pause, there's a few from the folks. If I could ask you, maybe
absolutely.
it's just probably a good time here. So this question comes from Lisa. It's, what about a 10-point scale? Does that have any value in your opinion, and why not, if not?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a So, in the surveying business, everyone has an opinion, and my view of 10-point scales, based on my experience working with organizations and looking at how customers respond, it becomes more challenging for people to select when you sort of get much beyond sort of 6. What's the difference between a 7 or an 8 or a 6 and a 7? I mean, ultimately, we think, based on focus groups that we've conducted over a period of time, that 5 and 4 are probably the most common ones that have been implemented, and we find that end users typically understand or find it more easily to rate between a 4-point system or a 5-point system than a 10-point system. However, there are lots of organizations that do use a 10-point system, but generally I'm looking at trying to make the simplest experience possible. So I try to keep it to a minimum if possible.
Okay, and another question here is, what is in your opinion, what's the right number of questions in the entire survey?
So we've actually done quite a bit of analysis on this. So we actually host a surveying service, and so one of the things that we've done is we've looked at the number of questions and we've built a correlation to response rates. And generally what we find is that if your survey, if it's a transactional survey, i.e. a survey that goes after an incident, once you start going above 7 questions, your non-complete rate actually goes up quite dramatically. We haven't been able to find that the non-complete rate for questions below 7, is really that impacted. Now, this is completely different from an annual survey or a semi-annual survey. If it's a one-time survey, we find that you can actually ask for up to 5 minutes of somebody's time to complete that survey. However, if it's a transactional survey, typically you're trying to get it complete in under 2 minutes, and that does limit the number of questions that you can typically ask. So we normally say, 7 questions is at the high end. Some organizations, do go more, but they're prepared then for a drop in survey responses.
Okay, excellent. And just to let everyone know as well, in case you're following along and wondering about accessing this later on, there are a couple of questions have just come through, and just we will reiterate that this session is being recorded and will be available for folks to view afterwards as well, and that'll be available on the TRRACC site. Okay, sorry for the interruptions. Thanks a lot, Charles.
No, thanks for asking the questions, folks. So there's something that isn't included in this particular survey that's a live survey for this particular organization, but I just want to talk about it a little bit. If you're looking to really implement customer service as part of an improvement program, you might want to consider this type of question. And this is basically a top 3 ranking question. And what it normally does is it looks at the questions that you've just asked people, and you're saying that, if you were us, in the next 90 days and you wanted us to focus on fixing something, what would it be, and rank your top 3 things. So they would come in here and, for example, say that the number 1 issue for them is, the ability for the service desk to resolve my inquiry or get it to the right resource. And so that would be like the number 1 thing. So they would rank that, and then they might rank something else number 2, number 3. And then basically what we do is we get a grid that really, provides additional input from the analysis perspective that says, okay, these are the top 3 things that folks feel that we should be working on. And if you're doing an improvement job correctly, those top 3 things should change, every 3 or 4 months. As you fix things in your environment, you're going to see other things sort of boil to the top. And again, we find that it's a great morale booster because people actually see the impact of your hard work on your client's perception of the service that they're receiving. But additionally, it really helps provide something very definable, very actionable in terms of your survey. Because, there's nothing worse than looking at 1,000 surveys, and to be able to interpret that information, I have to read 1,000 surveys. I really want to be able to roll up these scores into something that I can action at a macro level as opposed to just reading every individual response. Now, certainly, if there is a low response, like someone scores really badly, you want to be able to send a note to your service desk manager or to the appropriate person and call that customer back. But that would be sort of a separate, process that would, resolve in dealing with unhappy customers. So we run this survey. Okay, we're going to get the scores back, and we're going to kind of look at the measurement stuff in a few moments. But the question is that, how do I go from survey to performance improvement? Because the thing with performance improvement, it doesn't just happen. You have to plan for it to happen. You have to execute it for it to happen, and you have to follow through and audit that it actually happened. Otherwise, even if it actually happened and you're not telling the story about it, for all intents and purposes, it hasn't actually happened. So this sort of final part of the presentation today is really about bridging this gap. We have the satisfaction measure in place. How do we link satisfaction to performance improvement? Now, I'm going back to the CSI model, and I'm not like a zealot. I really don't care what the model is that an organization uses, but I do think that an organization should use some type of model for service improvement, because why reinvent the wheel? There's certainly no brownie pins for reinventing the wheel. If there's something out there that is simple and works, why don't we just take advantage of it? Now, I like the ITIL's continual service improvement model just because it's simple to explain, and it's really based around common sense. And that common sense is really about, determining where you are, determining where you want to be, doing stuff to get to where you want to be, and then sort of measuring, whether you were able to get there. It's really, this isn't rocket science at the end of the day, but for whatever reason, IT departments often don't have this implemented in a formal way. You often have pockets of improvement. You have particular individuals who, by their very nature, improve their performance over time. But if you looked at a service improvement program, very, very few IT organizations actually deploy these. And so if we look at it from the perspective of this survey, how would I wrap a service improvement initiative around my customer service metric? Well, step one is I have to analyze the data. So what type of data would I get from that survey that we just kind of ran? So I'm going to share that with you. This is actually real data that was taken from a real live organization. And they conducted 2 surveys. In this particular case, there was a survey that went to the IT service desk, and then there was a survey that went to the escalation groups. And we basically would measure at an aggregate level, what the satisfaction scores were and what the importance scores were. And so from the service desk perspective, we scored, what is it here, a 2.9. And from an importance score, it was 4.2. Then from an escalation group's perspective, they actually thought that the service was actually better, but, that the support process wasn't as important. And this is something that we would normally expect to see because, I talk about sometimes that the service desk is the Rodney Dangerfield of IT. They don't get the respect that they're due or that they deserve. And in this particular case, this reflects that. The escalation groups believe that the projects that they're working on are often the most important thing, and that the service desk might not necessarily be as important. And so that was actually reflected here. And in this particular organization, there were some pretty severe cultural issues in terms of there was a blame game going on that the service desk really couldn't do, too much right. So at an aggregate level, this is what we're talking about. Then if I wanted to sort of break this number down in terms of the dimensions, this is kind of what we would expect to see here. And so I'd start looking at, where am I scoring low in terms of satisfaction? So I'd look at my reliability questions, I'd look at my timeliness questions in the survey, and then I'd correlate it and just make sure that people think that these things are important to them. Because if they're not important, I might not actually spend the time improving that part of my service. So if my importance scores for timeliness were actually low, I might sort of question and say, okay, I want to actually focus on improving the things that people say to us are important for us to improve upon. And then that final ranking, this is the sort of output that you might expect from that, where I basically would have sort of a ranking saying, okay, the number one thing that I need to fix in the next 90 days is the ability to capture my incident information before it's sent out to external IT groups. So this survey, is obviously an internal survey that was done as opposed to an external survey. So after I analyze the data, what are my outputs? Well, my outputs are really going to be a baseline survey score. I'm a great believer that before you do any type of improvement, and even if you've done improvement and you're going to do more improvement, you want to capture your baseline score. Reporting isn't about putting charts on paper and then sending them out to everyone with an automated service. Reporting is basically telling a story. And as we all know, if we want to tell a great story, I need to have a beginning of the story, a middle of the story, and an end of the story. And the baseline is the beginning of the story. Okay, without that, people don't really have any context as to where we were. The second value of my step one analysis is that I'm going to come up with a target value. So the target value is the end of my story. This is where we're going to be at the end of the story. And then this is the part, for whatever reason, people never seem to get to. This is basically the concept of, well, if we're going to establish a target and we're going to report on a baseline, we're actually going to have a plan in place of how we're going to go from the baseline to the target, and we're going to have to communicate that to folks, and we're going to have to sort of make ourselves accountable as to whether we're doing those things. And we're going to talk about some of the tools that you can use to sort of get yourself there in a few moments. But the improvement ideas are really important, where you're basically going to capture a whole bunch of improvement ideas, and you're going to capture them in some type of list, and I'll show you what that might look like in a few moments' time. So if I was to build a scorecard off this data, what would it look like? Well, it might look like this, where I would have some type of performance metric. In this particular case, I've called it client satisfaction. I might have a weighting of that, in this particular case, it might be 100%, but where I'm actually building to is actually incorporating a number of other measures as part of my service improvement plan. And then what I would do here is I establish my baseline, my target, my actual performance. And so on my scorecard, I'm actually showing someone where we were, where we want to be, and where we actually are today. And, I'm really telling a story about this information.
And Charles, who is the intended audience for this scorecard?
So scorecards are great communication tools for senior level management. So I would say it would be a great thing to present to a CIO, because I talk to a lot of CIOs, and one of the #1 complaints that they say is that they get way too much information from a service desk. And I just have an example here of what like a built-out CIO type scorecard might look like on my next slide, where I would incorporate client satisfaction, but I would do the same for a bunch of other measures like first call resolution or cost per service desk contact or whatever it happens to be. And I'd put in my baseline, my target, my performance. You do some magic with the numbers, and you can actually deliver a single number to a senior manager that explains whether things are going up or going down over a period of time. So you have your outputs from your analysis of the data. And now you have your target in place. You have to figure out, okay, I'm going to have to go from here to there, and I'm going to need to have a plan. And parts of the plan are that you're going to need to communicate it to folks in a way that it becomes understandable. Now, what a lot of people do with their improvement plans is that they build a Microsoft project plan, for example. And I've got nothing against Microsoft Project. I live with Microsoft Project. But if I'm communicating to people, I'm trying to get everyone excited about this improvement, I need to have more than just the task list of things that I'm going to allocate out the organization. Because improvements are really an exercise, again, in marketing and getting people on board, because you have a gravitational pull of inertia at most organizations that you have to overcome. And the way you overcome that gravitational pull of inertia is by creating some excitement about the potential that you're going to get from implementing these improvements. So we use a tool called a tactical tree. And I don't know whether you've seen this before, but it basically takes a project plan and it puts it in a format that actually explains, what you're intended to achieve in plain English from the outcomes of these things. And so I completed one, so I'm just going to kind of walk you through for that organization that we were just looking at the results for. So basically, the #1 result that we saw from the survey was that the first-line support people and the second-line support people weren't communicating very well. So our overall intent was that we needed to improve the communication between our front and second-tier support resources. and we were going to tackle 3 areas of things that we're going to do. We were going to enable technology that was going to be easier to use for the escalated groups, because they were complaining that it was really difficult to log tickets in the tool because it was set up for the service desk, and they didn't have like a mobile client, for example, and they're out and about, visiting, end users on the road, for example. We wanted to implement a first call resolution program for Tier 1 resources. And the idea behind that was that, right, in this particular organization, the service desk was responsible for creating knowledge. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to push that responsibility to the people who actually had the knowledge within the organization, which was the escalation groups. And then we wanted to build a set of measures that were going to basically demonstrate this improvement. And then each tactical area resulted in a series of tactics. Now, my tactics actually link to a project plan, because I'm going to need a little project or a mini project for each one of these things. I wanted to enable an iOS and an Android client for my escalation people. So that's where we build out the project plan. But before that, we want to have something that we can get people excited about and explain how our actions are going to roll up and actually impact the measures that we uncovered in our client satisfaction survey, and whether our clients are internal IT practitioners, whether our clients are end users, we might have different tactical trees for different groups of users. So the outputs of this process of this here to there plan, and I already seen anyway, the outputs of this plan is that you're going to have an activity plan, and your activity plan basically comes from sort of the tactical tree, and it's basically a project plan, and you might have something called an inventory of improvements. And what I want to do, actually, I just wanted to show you what this looks like live. I have an example here. I'm going to give myself a second just to have my screen refresh. Hopefully what you're seeing on your screen is what we call like an inventory of improvements. So an idea behind this is that over time, you're going to brainstorm a whole bunch of ideas of how to go from your baseline to your target. And one of the things that you want to do is to just have a simple way, a simple place of logging it. Some people actually use their ITSM tool and kind of use this type of structure. But what you basically do is, if you kind of look here, I've got an inventory improvement idea, which is about implementing incident ownership on the service desk. This is where the idea came from. This is the description of the problem that the organization is actually having. And then this is the brief description of the improvement. And then what we do is that we rank the idea, like normally it's a CSI manager or someone who's overly responsible for choosing which ideas we're going to implement, and we measure it based on dimensions. So the dimensions that we normally use are, alignment to our strategic goals, whether the change is actually going to be customer felt, is it going to have an impact on our priority metrics. So that scorecard that I showed you a bit earlier on might be what we call our priority KPIs. Those are the things that are going to our CIO. Are we going to impact those in a positive way? And what would be the time cost to implement these things? And so what we do is we basically can, put a value for each one of these items, and at the end, it basically spits out a calculated value that will tell me, what my priority is. So for example, anything over 75, at the top here you can see is a priority 1. Anything between 50 and 74 would be a priority 2, and anything less than 50 would be a priority 3. And it's not that people can't do this without sort of a spreadsheet, but you've got lots of ideas that occur all over the place, and it's a great way to basically classify some of these things in a particular area. And we actually show in this worksheet tactical trees where I actually just kind of like build this out. It might be a little bit too difficult for you to see on this particular point, but I build out my tactical tree by just establishing what my tactical intent is, the area that I'm going to be focusing on, the results, what impacted KPIs, and then specifically what are the tactics that we're actually going to be focusing on. So, whatever tools you use, it doesn't really matter. I like sort of graphically enable tools because I find that I can get more buy-in from people who are spending money than if I show someone a project plan. I think it's really nice to be able to roll stuff up into, in terms of, intent. This is what we're intending to do, and we link all of those deliverables right up to that intent. And sometimes you get sort of more money that way if you can show that you're actually impacting some of these things, but it can just be a project plan. What's important is that you plan that you're going to have to do some type of action with this data and make sure that that plan is in place. And I know we're almost running out of time, so what I want to do is just sort of wrap up today and just sort of summarize some of the key points that we can consider to be takeaways. I think customer satisfaction can really be a catalyst to drive performance improvement. It's a metric that people can rally around. There's not many metrics out there. Like if you ask 10 people, what are the 10 most important things that we should be measuring in IT, you might get 10 different answers. Customer satisfaction can be one of those measures that can really bond us all together and give us sort of a sense of agreement. Yeah, this makes sense. We should be tracking it and figuring out ways that we can improve it. We talked about telling stories with our data. It's more than just, giving me a satisfaction value. I want to be able to show where we were, where we're going to be, where we are today, and I want to tell a story with that information. We want to plan to action the data we're collecting. So we talked about, tactical trees and action plans or project plans and how you're going to basically create some of those things. We talked about taking advantage of a surveying methodology. This is one methodology. There are hundreds of methodologies. I just believe it's worthwhile picking one and sticking with it for at least a year and making sure that, you're able to get some results. If you're finding that it's not working after a year, you can maybe switch to another methodology. The reality is that, different methodologies are going to work in different types of environments. And then, reiterating the point that we covered earlier on today, it's really important to share results with your customers to help improve your response rates. People complain all the time that their response rates are low, and it's because it's kind of like a black hole. People fill out the surveys, and then they never hear from you again until you're asked to fill out the next survey. If you reply back and say, thank you for submitting, this is what we're doing with the information, this is what we found based on the information that you told us, these are the areas that we're improving upon for the next sort of 90-day improvement cycle, and if you want to influence this, give us a call, or we're going to send you out another survey, and you can you just let people know that you're doing stuff with the information. There's nothing worse from a customer's perspective is that you provide the information and then you never hear anything back again. Now, what we offered this last time, if people want to dive in and actually have a chance to look at how some of these surveys can be created, we have an option here where if you go to www.thinkitsm.com/ThoughtRock, you can just go, you just put your name and your company in there, and then in the top left-hand corner, once you've sort of registered, you'll be able to look at a best practices end-user survey. We call it a business consumer survey, a best practices IT practitioner survey, and a best practices executive satisfaction survey. And this is a survey designed for the business executives and the IT executives within an organization. So with that, I think we are wrapping up.
That's excellent, Charles, and I'll just give everyone a few more minutes if they want to post a question. And I will say thank you very much. We do a lot of these sessions, and I think over the 2 sessions that you've put together, when we ask presenters, educators to come on and do, to present theory, but also really to focus on practical prescriptive guidance for people, I don't think anybody could argue that what you've delivered in the last 2 sessions has done that. I mean, I think people can walk away with real material. You've given them access off of thinkitsm.com and /ThoughtRock to take a look at some more of those tools. So I would encourage folks to do that on this call. And also, if you have any other questions, just definitely reach out to Charles directly and his team. Again, fabulous job, Charles, and we really appreciate that. So I'm going to give everyone a few more minutes in case there's any other questions. I get a lot of people that are posting comments on the questions that are just saying thank you very much, excellent. So again, Charles, I think everyone definitely got out what they wanted. A couple more minutes though. We'll wait for a few more questions while I say that. Just next week on ThoughtRock Live on Tuesday, January 29th, just a reminder that we have Frank Herman, who's the principal of Lean Vista, and he'll be talking about using Lean Six Sigma process improvement to implement ITIL service delivery best practices. So just learning from the best practices of process improvement as found in the Lean Six Sigma approach to find out how to make your ITIL-based process enhancements the best they can be. So same time, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time next Tuesday. I don't see any other questions right now, Charles. I'm just going to take a quick look here. I just see, I don't see, I just see a kind of a thank you so much. So I think we're good. I think the people asked a few questions on the fly. Oh, quick question. One more, last one before I pop out here. Have you heard of the Net Promoter Score approach?
I haven't, but that doesn't really mean anything. There were a lot of great methodologies out there. So because I haven't heard of it doesn't mean it's not any good.
Yeah, I guess the comment is it measures referenceability. If that helps.
Oh,
also.
okay. Yeah. I have seen that actually. Sorry, I didn't know what it was called. I'm mixed a little bit about it, if it's the one I'm thinking of, because they basically just ask one question, and it's basically whether you're going to refer this service to someone else. So my question is, how relevant is that for an IT or an ITSM type organization? I definitely get it if you're selling a product or you're providing a commercial application, but I'm not convinced of its applicability to an IT service management improvement initiative.
Okay, great. And again, thanks for the question, Lisa. So again, thank you, everyone. If there's again any other comments or feedback or questions, I really do encourage you to reach out directly to Charles and the Think ITSM team. I think they've done a phenomenal job of providing really valuable, practical, prescriptive guidance here. So any other questions you have, you are free to reach out to them. And if Charles, if anything comes through, info@ThoughtRock.com, we'll make sure to forward it off to you as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
Charles, thanks again. It was fantastic. Appreciate it. Appreciate the 2 sessions that you put together, and we hope to have you back on ThoughtRock sometime soon.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.